Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that you all are having a great day. I hope that you guys have really enjoyed everything that's currently going on today. There's been a lot of different developments globally, as you can see here. There's a lot of different dots, especially when it comes to in and around Ukraine. And so I hope that y'all are enjoying your wonderful last day of June, and I do hope that you, your family, and your friends are, of course, safe. And if not, I really do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. So, if you check out the description below, you guys have made this a pretty awesome community, and the fact that we can be the news that gives back. We can, you guys have made it so that way that our whole project goal is to help as many people in the world as we can and to present the news in an apolitical and unbiased fashion, or at least when we have a bias, we at least plainly come out and say so. And so, with that, you guys have been able to make that a reality. And I can't thank you guys enough for your support. But even more, more than just the support for the channel, but the support for the organizations in the description. So if you go and check that out, you will see a ton of organizations in the description. All of that is for things all over the world. Whether you're talking about the war ongoing in Ukraine, we have a whole bunch of stuff for Ukraine in there, and there's always more. We have stuff though that I would really want to emphasize on that is outside of Ukraine as well. There are other crises ongoing in the world, stuff that's been going on since even before Ukraine was a thing, and Ukraine has caused a lot of rations to be cut drastically throughout the world, and in order to support the humanitarian efforts as a result of the war in Ukraine. But we also see that we also see climate change having a very significant impact on the planet and the people, and the people in places that already were suffering underwater and food insecurities. So please make sure to give places such as Ethiopia, Somalia, just Africa in general, in Southeast Asia, your attention as well. We don't want the spotlight completely taken away from them just because of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So please make sure to check them out too. And if you have any more, our link to our Discord is in the description, as well as our website. You guys can go on there and let a staff member know if you guys have any additional ones, any additional like donation links that you guys may have, or fundraisers or charities or organizations. We have two main criteria for these. The two main criteria are that, one, it is a reputable organization. We can go through a history with them. We can go through their financial reports, their tax records, and all of this stuff, and verify them. And also, we want to make sure that 80% or more of the donations that they receive are going directly to their programs. So if you guys go and check that stuff out, you guys will be able to see, that places or some organizations like your brother, our brother's brother, is 99.6% of all of their donations actually go to the program. They actually go to helping people. We don't want this stuff going to administration costs and salaries. We don't want to pay someone's salary. We want to help people with this project. So thank you for supporting that. If you guys can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us. It helps us reach more people. The more people that are here, obviously, they get to enjoy the way that we do the news here. But more importantly, the more people that are here, the more of a meaningful impact we can make on people's lives throughout the globe, on the very crises that we talk about here every single day on the channel. And we're never going to be doing super chats on this channel. We're never going to be doing anything, like pushing merchandise or any of that. 100%, everything that we do here is to go to charity. We're doing everything for charities. When we get large enough to do so, we will have charities directly on the stream. Everything is about charities. Everything is about helping people. Listen, I have a full-time job. Everyone here is volunteering to do this. So we're volunteering our time. We care about this project. We care about what's happening here. We care about what's happening to people throughout the world. And that's what we're here to do, folks. So you're never going to see it. We have our outline for our plan on how we plan on running this whole thing, even available publicly on our Discord if you guys want to check out exactly what we plan on doing here and how we plan on going about it. So please Please help us support the endeavor and support these organizations. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and dive right into the news. And there is a ton of it, especially when it comes to things going on in and around Ukraine. And the first thing we come up here to in on our special report here is freedom or death. And this is a poll conducted by the Wall Street Journal that shows 89% of Ukrainians reject the idea of ceding a part of the country to Russia in exchange for peace. Obviously, this is the Wall Street Journal's poll. If we want to go and we can check them out, this is a pretty significant thing, because something that's been said over and over and over again by Russia is most Ukrainians are willing to give up. They want to give up the fight. And that's not what we're seeing at all. Once again, there's an information war going on. You have to understand that there's an information war going on, and both, everyone is involved in this. It's not just Russia, it's not just Ukraine, but everyone is involved in this information war, and different journalist agencies have to compete in and amongst that, which isn't very easy to do, to tell you from personal experience. But Russia is going to want to undercut the narrative that Ukrainians support the fight. It demoralizes morale when statistics like that come out. And when especially falsified statistics come out, it demoralizes morale of the country. Well, maybe my opinion is a minority, which according to the Wall Street Journal, that is not the case. So a little bit of a conflicting report there. Just bear in mind, but still very good signal that things are much more on the up and up than what a lot of at least Russian sources are going to be telling you. And in regards further with some of the diplomatic ties that were severed between Ukraine and Syria following Syria's admission, they said that they have decided to recognize the Donetsk People's Republics and Luhansk People's Republics, the self-declared sovereign nations. They are going to recognize them, or Syria will be recognizing them officially as independent and sovereign nations. And so Ukraine officially cut all diplomatic ties with the country, with the exception of its consulates. And they released an official statement. This is their official statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website in regards to this. And it states, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine strongly condemns the decision of the Syrian Arabic Republic to recognize the so-called independence, quote-unquote, of the temporarily occupied territories of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine. We consider this decision to be an unfriendly act against Ukraine, an encroachment on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our state, and a gross violation of Ukrainian law, the UN Charter, and fundamental norms and principles of international law. There is no doubt that the Syrian regime is trying to give pseudo-subjectivity to the Russian occupying administrations in Donetsk and Luhansk on the behest of the Kremlin curators. In response to this unfriendly act, Ukraine declares the severance of diplomatic relations with Syria without a severance of consular relations, in accordance with Article 2 of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations done in Vienna on the 24th of April 1963. The Ukrainian side is also initiating the procedure of imposing a trade embargo on Syria, as well as imposing other sanctions on Syrian legal entities and individuals. Our position is clear. Quote, our position is clear. We respond as harshly as possible to any attempts to undermine the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we protect national interests by all available means, including on the diplomatic front, emphasized Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. In connection with the crimes of the regime of Bashar al-Assad against the Syrian people, the Ukrainian side has already closed its embassy of Ukraine in Damascus in 2016 and ordered the closing of the embassy of Syria in Ukraine in 2018. Protection of the interests of Ukrainians in Syria is carried out by the Embassy of Ukraine in Lebanon. And that is the full official statement from the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs regarding their severance of diplomatic ties with Syria. Here in Sumy Oblast, the shelling just continues, and this is coming from Dmytro Zivitsky, who is the head of the Sumy Regional Military Administration. He has stated, quote, Russian aggressors shelled the Bilopilska, Krasnopilska, and Velikopolsarivka communities in the Sumy region on June 29th. 2 people were killed and 10 citizens were injured. that at this point has become pretty much a daily event when it comes to the ongoing war. Sumy at this point has seen, as well as Chernihiv too. Chernihiv Oblast and Sumy Oblast have both seen significant upticks in shelling within the regions, despite Russian forces having pulled out months ago at this point. No further information coming out of Kharkiv, but we do know more missile strikes have occurred within the city. They apparently haven't hit anything particularly major, I would say. Slavyansk, though, is getting more Russian shelling ahead of advance at this point, is really what we believe is happening in this region. Slavyansk really rests here on the edge. Slavyansk is the next major city before hitting Kramatorsk, which is a major central roadway network and rail network within this region, this eastern side of the country. And Russian forces, we do know, have an axis of advance towards Slavyansk at this point, and Slavyansk has seen a very large uptick in shelling. In fact, this can even be this is even reiterated to an extent by Vadim Leak, who is the head of the Slavyansk City Ministry or Military Administration, who said, quote, Russian aggressors shelled the city of Slavyansk in the Donetsk region on June 30th. 6 people were injured. Russian troops used cluster shells banned by international conventions. Now, someone pointed out to me yesterday, and this is indeed true, that Ukraine and Russia, neither of which are signatory conventions banning cluster munitions. That is true. But the use of cluster munitions inside of high concentrations of civilian targets violates the Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention, which is so the Geneva Convention that we currently go by is the 1948 Geneva Conventions, which were written in 1948 and adopted in 1949. There are 3 additional protocols to the conventions. Protocol number 1 was accepted in 1977 along with Protocol 2. Protocol 3 was not ratified until 1980. Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention is regarding the protection of civilians within a conflict zone and civilian properties. And what the articles under this state is essentially military planners have a responsibility to limit the amount of destruction and collateral damage of property and life, of civilian infrastructure and civilian life within their military planning. It has to be within their scope. That does not mean that civilian casualties and collateral damage cannot occur. However, attempts must be made to mitigate through use of precision munitions and through basic military planning strategy and weighing of tactical and strategic importance. And by using cluster munitions, this shows, especially inside of Slavyansk, which is a highly densely populated civilian center, that there was no forethought in military planning. Therefore, it is considered a war crime under the Geneva Conventions under Protocol 1 because there was no attempt to mitigate the destruction or civilian loss of life. So if you wish to learn more, I highly recommend reading the Geneva Convention. It is kind of boring, and as well as the protocols. They are boring, but when we talk about war crimes here, I don't want to throw around the word war crime and not have any basis of understanding for this, as many places do. You will see hashtag Russian war crimes. You'll see all sorts of stuff being posted everywhere. This is a war crime. This is a war crime. This is a war crime. Not every civilian death is a war crime. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is a tragedy, but it is not a war crime. But there are things that certainly are, and I want to be able to have those intelligent discussions. So I implore you to please read up on the Geneva Convention and understand the difference between a tragedy and a war crime, because that is going to play a major importance between what that's going to greatly differ your understanding and what's happening in the war. Here in Severodonetsk, according to the head of the Luhansk Regional Administration, Sergei Haida, Russian forces did appoint a new mayor of Severodonetsk. The individual reportedly only has completed education through grade 9. So basically, he got up to grade 9, dropped out of school. And he has reportedly told citizens that due to essentially the complete destruction of Severodonetsk, it is not likely that the city will be rebuilt anytime soon. But as we jump immediately across the river, we do know that Russian forces are continuing to push into Severodonetsk, or into Lysychansk. Lysychansk continues to be shelled, and Russian troops are on the outskirts of the city, though no street-to-street fighting has been reported at this point in time. However, between the time that this came out and we are speaking now, that could have had a significant change. Do not think of these front lines as being very static. The best way I can describe it is when someone is to hit a guitar string. It is constantly vibrating back and forth, back and forth. There are offensives and counteroffensives, and troops are trying to outmaneuver each other. Some places are static, some places aren't. Some places are more kinetic in general when it comes to their combat, such as the Luhansk region, whereas places such as in the Zaporizhia Oblast, we're not going to see nearly as much kinetic combat situations as we already currently do here in the Luhansk. So, but according to Sergei Haidai, Russian forces are on the outskirts of Lysychansk, but they have not yet moved into the city. That being said, he has stated that the city is not surrounded, but he has ordered that Ukrainian civilians need to be sheltering in place at all times, as the city is under excessive bombardment by Russian artillery and air assets, and also that Russian forces are attempting to push to cut off the major highways into the city of Lysychansk. What we're seeing here is an attempt to completely encircle Ukrainian forces within this pocket, and if you notice, there is a very significant difference in our maps today to reflect this. We have some much more updated information regarding the battlefield on this point. We have cross-referenced with other reputable organizations tracking the front lines of the war, and I've kind of found a happy medium inside of those along with our independent reports. And you'll kind of see what we're talking about here shortly. One of those being the fact that this, oh man, the Verkhnokhamyanka. I'm so sorry. I'm not very good at pronunciation. I'm so sorry for pronunciating this. The Verkhnokhamyanka. This is an oil facility, essentially. It's listed as a village, but this is a giant oil facility. Russian forces have pushed into this. They according to the Ministry of Defense and everyone else, that Russian forces have pushed into this oil facility. They do not control it in its entirety. What they control is the southeastern portion and the northwestern portion, and the west northwestern portion of the oil facility at this point, at least at the time of this reporting, when we received the information. They do not control the entirety of the oil refinery, but this is one of the main axes of attempting to completely encircle. As you can tell, there has been a drastic change on the battlefield as to the seriousness of the situation with the encirclement. This pocket has definitely grown smaller, and Russian forces continue to push towards those outskirts. But also here we can see where they're closing that bottleneck between the Popasna sector, and also over with Russian forces over by Bilohorivka, where they attempted to make those amphibious pontoon crossings. Can you take a look here? Russian reporters with RIA News were embedded with Russian forces during the attack, which is what we're getting this from here. Over here in Kadivka, which is pretty far behind the lines at this point, another Russian ammo depot was in fact destroyed by Ukrainian forces within the vicinity of the city. And Kadivka has proven to be a major stockpile point and logistical hub for Russian and separatist forces within this region. So we can take a look at this here. So, I mean, they just keep hitting. They just keep hitting this region. But that's good for the Ukrainians. For those that don't know, we do have a very open bias for Ukraine. Based on when you're watching this stuff, please keep in mind you're seeing anywhere from 10 to 25% of the footage that we actually see when it comes to the war in Ukraine. The reason being is, one, I would be here all night, and I have a full-time job. So I can't be here all night to do this, unfortunately. As much as I love this kind of, reporting and everything, I just can't do it. Then another reason, on top of that, a lot of it is stuff that can't be, very thoroughly, saying to, is to say, this is recent footage. Another good part of it is we can't locate in general where this is happening. If we can't locate an exact location, at least city-wise, we at least try and get it, this is happening somewhere on the Eastern Front. This is recent footage. We know, based off of the terrain and everything else, what's happening here. But a vast majority, I'd say 50% or more of what you don't see is just absolute gore, and it's just stuff we can't show, and we won't show. I don't think anyone should have to see it. I feel extremely bad for people who do. There are plenty of other channels, and other websites that are there for that, if that is what you're looking for here. But I don't think it adds anything to this. There are certain times where I think it certainly does, such as yesterday, but that's available on the map only, is the one from yesterday. But we can't, with any moral ground to stand on, support Russia in its endeavor to take Ukraine, on just the principles of the UN Charter alone. But when you're watching this stuff and you're researching for this, as we do, it's abhorrent what's happening. And so we have a pretty open bias for Ukraine, to say the least, but it's not based off of I'm a Western individual, so I therefore have a bias towards Ukraine. It's of I have seen so much that there is no way I can support it. So that's why you'll hear us make statements like, this is good for Ukraine, this is good for Ukraine. And I am not a fan of, the Russian government. But anyway, going back to the original point here, is this is very good for Ukraine. The reason for this is because one of the major problems with the Russian forces is the fact that they deployed not enough forces for a ground invasion to begin with. Usually you want at least a 2 to 3 times advantage in troop and equipment numbers against an invading army, because attacking forces versus defending forces are probably going to lose anywhere from a quarter to a half, a third to a half of what attacking forces are going to be losing per day of combat per 1,000 troops. And there's science behind combat casualties and planning this stuff. You can go the LUBs. You can go. It's called the LUBs graph, I believe is the name of it. I believe there's also Everett's template that you can go off of, which is for the British. There are several templates. Every country kind of develops their own methodology behind planning for casualties. But Russian forces instantly threw that out the window. They have a 1-to-1 power ratio and manpower ratio against Ukrainian forces at this point in the war. They're quickly losing that as they're taking very severe losses, being the attacking army. And also as Ukrainian forces, when it comes to the firepower ratio, Ukrainian forces are getting a significant boost, because there are tons of countries that are just supporting them with military equipment and NATO arms that far outguns and outranges the Russian forces and what they can put into the field, which is mostly old Soviet stockpile equipment without a lot of modernizations. Most of their modernized equipment was already been captured or destroyed. The other major issues when they deployed that many troops, Russia deployed initially about 15 battalion tactical groups. They only had, which requires somewhere in the vicinity of between 6,000 and 7,000 trucks, supply vehicles, in order to support that many forces. Russia at the time, only according to open source documents, had about 4,500 trucks to support that large of an operation. We saw this early in the war with the commandeering of vehicles, but they have a serious logistical shortcoming. Russia has been very terrible at logistics overall. World War II, they were very terrible at logistics. They only survived thanks to the Lend-Lease Act. You see this during, more recently, 2008, during the invasion of Georgia, 1989, the invasion of Afghanistan, and the war in Afghanistan. So you see this, popping up over and over and over again. Russia is not great at logistics. Striking Russian logistics, what logistics they do have, such as these ammunition depots, fuel depots, barracks areas, obviously command centers. Everyone wants to take out a commanding officer. That significantly decreases their ability to fight, because now this ammo is destroyed. They have to bring up new ammunition. They don't have the trucks to do it. They're losing trucks every day to the fighting, so they're constantly getting degraded logistically, and they now have a lessened stockpile. That means that these troops that are on the front lines in the Popasna axis of advance have to wait even longer before they get more fuel, more ammunition, so they can't fight, they can't move, they can't pull out their wounded because their ground evac vehicles are going to be hauling ammunition, and it's too risky to bring them out via air because they'll likely be shot down, because they don't, the Russians don't have a lot of, this is specifically a medical helicopter. They don't have a lot of that. They're using combat utility helicopters that aren't marked, therefore they're clearly targets. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. So every time you see that happen, it's a major blow to Russian logistics and Russia's ability to keep fighting. Another reason for why this map has changed so significantly is what we see here, and that is that Pavlovka was liberated. At least this is according to the Directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. This is Alexei Haromov, who is the deputy head of the main operational directorate. And he stated, quote, "The armed forces of Ukraine have liberated the village of Pavlovka in the Donetsk region." Very short and simple statement here, but what this tells us is that Russian forces were actually much further ahead in their advances than what we had thought. The maps that we cross-referenced and the other organizations we cross-referenced on also seem to indicate this very similarly. So on top of what we've already kind of been seeing and kind of had a feeling of at this point, we know that these aren't entirely accurate or representative of what's happening here on the ground. We are just trying to give a relative idea with what sources we have. So please keep that in mind when you're watching these battle lines move and shift. Down here, we see SU25 flying at very low altitude, Ukrainian SU25. The Ukrainian Air Force has had a great resurgence in the last couple of months, and we see them operating very actively on the front lines, which is complete 180 from what you saw at the beginning of the war. A lot of this has to do with the fact that they now have the parts to keep their aircraft up and running and flying. Another part of this is the fact that they have more area to operate freely in. And also, Russia has faced enough shortcomings in trained pilots and shot down aircraft and aircraft losses that while they still do use them, and they use them very significantly, the localized air superiority that Russia enjoyed in areas where they had a large concentration of forces and they could maintain localized air superiority, such as what they did over Mariupol during the final stages of the battle, they no longer enjoy that. They no longer enjoy that whatsoever. Overall, the airspace in Ukraine remains contested at this point in the war. That is thanks to anti-air defenses and man-pad launchers that have done a very successful job at keeping those areas contested, despite Ukraine's air force being outnumbered very significantly and statistically not being capable of withstanding the Russian air force. But Russia also hasn't committed its entire air forces to the conflict. We still know that there are some operating within the Southern Command, operating within Syria in support of operations there as well. So, but they have lost localized air support in many of these frontline regions. Over here, we can see that Ukrainian forces that were operating in GMG came under artillery bombardment. They're just forced back into their static positions, which are they have trench lines here, but they are operating a grenade. A GMG is a grenade launcher machine gun, a grenade machine gun. But they have a couple different variants of this. I didn't get a good look to be able to tell you which one it is, but we can go ahead and take a look at this here.
Що? Це ствол гарячий. На мене. Давай, понятно. В ямку, за мной.
От это иншаллах! Сука, да выебались все-таки, ебать. Тупо да выебывались. Сука. По нам запили.
Пасики, ебать, на двоим. Тут.
And you see that very, very frequently along these front lines. A lot of the footage coming out, especially in areas where it's not nearly as kinetic as you would say in areas such as the Luhansk Oblast, where areas where you're not seeing such kinetic close quarters combat, you're going to see a lot of artillery usage. Surprisingly enough, we were expecting to see the largest tank battle of since World War II. We still have yet to see that, but that is this warfare, the Donbass, is more akin to what Russian doctrine suits. Now, it's obviously not working in their favor because Russian doctrine is honestly extremely outdated. But nonetheless, this does suit it much more. This is much more representative of what they train to do. That high pace, that high usage of saturation bombardments with artillery as a first phase, an armored spearhead in high and fast-paced outmaneuverability, maneuver warfare doctrine to break through Ukrainian lines or enemy lines with their armored spearhead and with a mop-up of infantry. What we see here in less kinetic areas is that immense use of artillery on both sides. That being with that understanding, you have to know that Ukrainian forces are going through between 4,000 to 6,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery shells every single day. 4,000 to 6,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery a day. The Russians are firing about 10 times that much back. So the Russians do maintain a vast superiority in artillery capability when it comes to quantity. Now, their guns usually are going to be very outranged by several kilometers by NATO ordnance and NATO weaponry, but that quantity is really making up for it at this point. Jump down here to Mariupol, where we see some very fresh images coming out of Mariupol. So these are specifically areas of the old city, quote-unquote, which is the downtown part of Mariupol. It's really a lot of original historical structures. This is kind of where the drama theater is located. But we can see some of the images coming out of this region currently. I mean, it's just destroyed. Of course. I mean, we knew that it was pretty destroyed. But once again, Mariupol is really just a city in name. All of these are 90% of the city is destroyed to the point that it must be rebuilt. These structures must be demolished and completely rebuilt. They are no longer structurally viable. And because there is no basic necessities to include running water, sanitation services. Obviously, the gas lines are destroyed. Everything has been destroyed. And there's extremely little, if not no, humanitarian aid in Mariupol. Decomposing bodies are rotting underneath the rubble and have been decomposing for some time, contaminating all the water, and citizens are resorting to collecting this severely contaminated groundwater that's collected from rain inside of craters left from the immense bombardment that happened here. So we can take a look at that here. And this is all over the city. This stuff's been contaminated. I mean, at this point, the decomposition of people is beyond recognition. I mean, they're puddles. And it's seeping into everything. So there's an immense cholera epidemic and various illnesses going around through Mariupol that is likely going to kill more. There are at least 3 mass grave sites that we know of that we've been able to identify through satellite imagery. And there's also a large filtration camp that Ukrainian citizens are deported to near Bezimene. And we also know that if they haven't been deported, they do have to carry around filtration paperwork, similarly to the Warsaw Ghetto and other ghettos during World War II. If you want to follow up on any of that information, that we have posted all of that here on the channel in previous streams. This is beyond frustrating. Absolutely beyond frustration. This is the Mariupol Drama Theater. The Mariupol Drama Theater was being used as a bomb shelter by Ukrainians inside the city of Mariupol when it was struck by at least what is believed to have been at least a Fab 500-pound bomb, which directly hit the center of the building. Keep in mind, this building survived World War II. And children was written on both sides of the building in Russian. RIA News is reporting what I can only say is misinformation. RIA News is reporting that Ukrainian troops forced civilians into the drama theater and then boarded up all entrances and exits of the theater, shooting anyone who attempted to leave. This is directly off of RIA News. So this is supposedly coming from an eyewitness. And the Nazis told civilians to go to the bomb shelter, but when people went in, they were stabbed to the door outside. Those who tried to break out and into the street were shot. When ours dismantled the rubble, there was no one in the basements, but there were 12 corpses at the entrance. Every day, 1,000 people pass through us, and all of them say the Nazis used them as a shield. They drove military equipment into peaceful courtyards and drove residents to the upper floors to the basements. And they themselves put weapons on top. From there, they fired at the positions of the DPR, quickly left, and as a result, peaceful people received retaliatory blow to the peaceful courtyard. We're going to get to, once we get to the international news, why that's misinformation. But think of how different that is from everything that you have seen. Even here on the channel, on other channels, on the news. Think about it. Think about everything you've seen. Think about every video that we have shown. Every propaganda video that showed BM-21 grads mercilessly firing on the city of Mariupol. Saturation bombardment. The BM-21 grad fires 122mm Katyusha rockets. They're dumbfire rockets. They're not precision-guided munitions. Why is there such an immense hatred? Well, there's a lot of history there, and not all of it I fully understand. As much as I am interested in the history and the culture of Ukraine, it would take 1,000,000 lifetimes or more to ever learn the history of everything that I may be interested in. But in general, Ukraine is the land of the Cossacks, and Ukraine was under the how do I say this? It was under the Russian Empire, under the Tsar, prior to 1917. And so it's these people are Russian, of Russian descent, which is really why one of the reasons why the reconstruction of the USSR is not really what I believe Putin is going for. While he has a lot of nostalgia for the USSR, the reason he would have nostalgia for the USSR but other people would not is because he was successful within the USSR. I mean, he was a high level, he's a high level officer within the KGB. He wasn't an agent, he wasn't a spy, he was an officer. He oversaw diplomatic affairs in Eastern Berlin. But he has nostalgia for it. But he has much more czarist ideology in his thinking, and you see this in his palaces and in his villas, his getaway locations, where you see the uses of the czar very frequently. Very czarist ideologies, a lot less Soviet ideologies and symbols. So prior to 1917 and the revolution that overthrew the Tsar, and then immediately following that, the revolution that overthrew the Mensheviks by the Bolshevik Revolution, led by Lenin himself, Lenin and Stalin. That Ukraine was under, as well as Eastern Poland, Lithuania, Belarus. All of this was all under Russia, under the Russian Empire. Then Ukraine was, then of course Ukraine became part of the Soviet Union, and that lasted for the duration of the Cold War, clear up until 1991, in which case Ukraine broke away and gained independence, as well as the numerous other states that currently now exist in the wider geopolitical scale. This is why, this is the exact same reason why Russia says we will revoke your independence to Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, because they are, they broke away, they became independent from the Soviet Union. Well, you can't do that. That's not, and they were also under the Russian Empire. That's why Kaliningrad over here is completely separate from the rest of Russia. Is because, this was through weird treaties still maintained by Russia. So that's kind of the overall arching thing. But the hatred for the Ukrainians, part of it is because the Ukraine is Europe is very diverse. Everyone's extremely different. The people in Crimea are different from everyone else. The Tatars of Crimea are different from your run-of-the-mill Ukrainians. It's a completely different type of people, and they're also very different from Russians. The Ukrainians are extremely different from Russians. They have similar Slavic language, yes, but they are separate languages. Ukrainian and Russian are not the same thing. They are Slavic in their base, but they are not the same language. And so Russians, true Russians, Moskois, I believe is what they're called, which means they're from Moscow. The Moscow Oblast, essentially, St. Petersburg, Moscow, the really populated regions that actually care about the politics, not the people starving slowly to death and currently are the descendants of people sent to the gulags in Siberia. No, I'm talking about the Russians in the actual inhabited part of Russia. Really see Ukrainians as a lesser people. They do not see them. You see this similarly, in the, during the Holodomor. The starvation, where millions of people died during the Holodomor famine. Kharkiv was one of the hardest hit places of the Holodomor. Obviously, that they did not care about this region. Where did they put? What did they do? The Chernobyl incident that occurred, that was completely swept under the rug. Completely swept under the rug. That the Chernobyl exclusion zone is still one of the most highly radioactive places on the planet. And so that's where the hatred comes from the Russians. Part of it is aggression for the loss and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Part of it is just seeing them as a lesser people and always having done so. And part of it is because there's really no point in time where Russia has not been under an authoritarian leader of some kind, whether you're talking the Tsar, or you're talking Lenin, or you're talking Stalin, or you're talking, any of the following, leaders of the USSR. I mean, for hundreds of years, the Russian people have been led by a very heavy-handed, very authoritarian, strong, powerful individual, influential individual at the top of their, as the head of state. And so the Russian people are used to just kind of following that. And whatever his ideologies may be and his sentiments may be, for whatever reason, if he's going crazy, I don't know, doesn't matter. Whatever he really says can kind of go. And that just kind of gets, flowed through to the people overall. Because there is no independent media in Russia. It's all state-run media now. RIA, it doesn't matter if you're talking to Ruptly, if you're talking to Sputnik, you're talking RT, you're talking about RIA Novosti. It doesn't matter. They're all run by the government. So there is no independent news. There isn't. So that's part of the reason for the hatred. I'm sure there's a lot more that I am totally missing here. I'm sure someone can probably correct me. I know that there is at least one Ukrainian national that can correct me. But that's the case overall, to kind of explain it. They just see them as lesser people. They don't see them as true Russians, but they see them Russian enough to want to take over their country. And as we continue the war crimes endeavor, we go over here to Berdyansk. Berdyansk is a port here in, I believe this is the Zaporizhia. Yeah, the Zaporizhia Oblast. It sits here, right here on the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea. And according to RT, they have stated that a cargo ship laden with stolen Ukrainian grain has left Berdyansk, as the port is now considered fully operational following demining efforts. So the leader of the local occupational government, Alexander Solenko, stated that we have prospects of signing contracts with Turkey. Once again, RT, a government-backed news organization, or a government-run news organization. So this ship was left port with several Russian naval warships for safety reasons. And is going to quote-unquote friendly countries. The current situation, the share of this Ukrainian grain in question is less than 1% of the global production of wheat and other cereals. The current situation with the Ukrainian grain has nothing to do with the food crisis. Well, this is an occupied territory. This is an occupied territory. This is occupied by the Russian Federation. Okay? There's a difference between a war crime and something that is a crime against humanity. The big difference between the two is that a war crime is perpetrated by an individual. A crime against humanity is perpetrated by the state and organization, and it is systematic. Clearing out Berdyansk in an occupied territory, loading up a cargo ship with grain, then selling or giving it away to another country that you consider friendly, while being escorted by Russian warships, is systematic. That is logistically, it is systematic. It has to be. Logistically, it wouldn't happen without it being systematic. Russia has now, through its own state-run media organization, admitted that it is committing pillaging. It is pillaging on a systematic scale. That would make it not just a war crime, but a crime against humanity. Systematically done. You don't get warships to escort cargo ships without it being systematic. You don't get that much grain to load a cargo ship without there being the involvement in an occupied region with partisans in an active war zone. That only happens if the Russians let it happen. That only happens if the Russians assist it in happening. These farmers aren't selling their grain. These farmers aren't selling the grain out of their warehouses. It's being taken from them. We know it's being taken from them. We have documents from the Russian government officials in Siberia talking about taking it from them. Not just because they were going to take it from the Donetsk and the Zaporizhia regions, but they were looking at taking it from the Kherson Oblast too. And they were gloating about it. And we aired it on this channel. We want to talk about frustration. I can't think of anything more frustrating than having to report on this day in, day out. Because this is the systematic human rights abuses, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Let me jump up. Let's see here. Nope, we already covered that. So that means we jump over here. And we have the return of the TikTok army. So these are the Kadyrovites. The Kadyrovites are Chechens that are loyal to Kadyrov. Kadyrov is the leader of Chechnya. Many people call these people Kadyrovites and not just the Chechens, because the Chechens fought against Russia during the First and the Second Chechen Wars in the late 2000s, or the late 90s, early 2000s. And so the Kadyrovites were sent to Mariupol. They really didn't get into much fighting, and what fighting they did get into, they got whooped pretty bad. Pretty bad. But we have never seen them actually in any significant, like, actual combat. The most combat I think we saw was actually of Kadyrovite forces up in Kharkiv as they were retreating in a full rout. And then they promptly went back across the border. We saw them in Belgorod, and they immediately left and went back to Chechnya. Anyway, but we have nicknamed them the TikTok Army because they essentially, all they did was they made videos where they showed that they were quite unquote fighting in the Battle of Mariupol, and just become basically a bunch of TikTokers with a bunch of famous videos that reportedly showed active fighting by the Chechens, quote unquote. However, we haven't really seen them too much since then. Like I said, the majority of what we've seen is the Akhmat Battalion over by Lysychansk, and we saw them once. Kharkiv, we saw them a couple times, the Kharkiv Oblast during their retreat, but really not anything since. Now they have made a resurgence, and they found a new thing to make content with. They're going to catch partisans, apparently, in the occupied regions of Ukraine. And as this, and quote this Chechen fighter, "There will be no Ukraine soon. Don't worry. Akhmat is power. God is great. They will never exist here again." Just take a look at this.
Скоро Украины не будет, не переживайте. Ахмат сила, Аллаху Акбар. Они больше не появятся здесь никогда в жизни. Мы Ахмат сила, Аллаху Акбар. Победим.
TikTok Army. I don't know what to tell you. So, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. But yes, so the Kadyrovites have made the resurgence as a TikTok army. I'm sure we will get more and more footage of them catching partisans, quote unquote, within the occupied regions as they continue to slowly die off as content creators and are trying to find their place in the world once again. The Kherson Oblast, you're going to see a very different kind of shape that this has taken. And so the reason that we're in this kind of configuration at this point is that, reminder, these battle lines are not exact whatsoever. They're just general representations of a general idea of what's happening on the ground based off of independent information and cross-reference. And what's happening here on the ground appears to have been very much different from what our assessment was. So we have changed it to reflect our redone, our new assessment based off of the evidence that we have. And one of the reasons for that evidence is actually this up here. Potomkin, which is here in the Kherson Oblast, has reportedly been liberated, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. This was so far behind the lines as to where we had originally had our battle line that we had to go back through and cross-reference once again just to see, okay, where are we now? Because we had seen where there were some pretty major pushes, and we were getting information that those pushes were much more significant than appears to be what they already were, or that Ukrainian forces have been pushed back in this region. Now, we haven't had a lot of information coming out of the Kherson and Mykolaiv Oblasts over the course of the war since the initial counteroffensives began. So information has been very difficult to come by, and so it really didn't allow for us to make adjustments as we went, because we weren't getting enough independent information to make any adjustment one way or the other. But that is apparently the situation. In a general sense, the situation here within the Kherson Oblast and the Mykolaiv Oblast, once again, not to scale or exact representation, just a general idea, including more specifically, I want to focus on the fact there is the lines, but the bulge is currently happening here, which puts the Ukrainian forces closest to Kherson itself. But we did end up moving that further back away from Novokokova, just as a representation at this point. But there is a bulge here, pretty significant bulge in the lines where Ukrainian forces have continued to conduct a counteroffensive. Looks like they've really concentrated their forces here, with some minor counteroffensives along the rest of the line. Here in Mykolaiv, a strike on Mykolaiv killed 6 people at least at this point, about 7:50 this morning local time. Rescue efforts are currently underway as they're digging through the rubble here. We can take a look. They did apparently recover the body of at least one woman underneath 5 stories worth of rubble. Odessa was also hit. A 9-story residential building along with a recreational center was hit directly. And at least 10 people have been confirmed killed and 7 injured after Russia launched missile strike by Russian strategic aircraft over the Black Sea earlier today.
Нужно переночевать, но оставили сегодня нам с родителей.
А вот
Это
бассейн.
эти новые бунгало. Это был бассейн. Это просто пиздец.
Давай я расскажу.
Место, где мы с Андреем должны переночевать.
Once again, what part of this screams military target to any of you as the audience?
Хорошо, я иду к тебе. Давай, я иду к тебе.
Охуеть.
And that brings us to the final bit of news and the highlight of the night, because we're actually going to end Ukraine on a little bit of a good note tonight, and that's because a major victory for Ukraine. The Russians have officially left Snake Island. They have been bombarded repeatedly. They were getting bombarded from shore by long-range artillery batteries, and they were hitting. So they no longer they put up a bunch of air defenses all and around after Ukrainian Air Force bombed Snake Island basically back into the Stone Age. They brought in a bunch of more air defenses. And so with their new NATO toys, Ukraine decided, you know what, we're just going to put artillery pieces on the shore. We're just going to shell it that way. And they did. And Russia decided it was no longer strategically or tactically viable to maintain control of the island, and have officially left. The last groups of them left this morning on 2 high-speed patrol vessels. So There are missing raid boats that they used to evacuate. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that the forces had left the island, calling it a successful operation and an act of goodwill to allow grain exports to resume now that they're leaving the island, of course. You gotta love some of the humor people put onto this.
Шага доброй воли вооруженные силы Российской Федерации завершили выполнение поставленных задач на острове Змеиный и вывели находившийся там гарнизон.
This is current satellite footage from Maxar satellites of Snake Island. You can see that the buildings are completely destroyed and decimated, but most of these are fresh burns where Ukrainian strikes had hit the island. You can see impact craters from artillery landing on the island from their shore-fired positions. So Snake Island is officially now declared liberated. And with that, that actually ends all of the news inside of the country of Ukraine. But trust me, there is plenty of news outside of Ukraine. Plenty of news outside of Ukraine regarding the conflict. So the first thing we're actually going to jump up into is, let's go ahead and start up here in St. Petersburg, where Medvedev has stated, he made some very interesting statements, to say the least. But he said, in certain circumstances, and this is at the St. Petersburg International Law Forum on Sanctions, in certain circumstances, quote, such retaliatory measures may be qualified as an act of international aggression, and even as casus belli. In response, right to individual and collective self-defense is exercised. What he's saying is, essentially, the sanctions imposed on Russia at this point account for an act of war against Russia, reiterating statements already previously stated by a multitude of individuals, both government and just well known throughout Russia, whether that's through government state-owned media sites. A couple of different things here. Russia's math just is not adding up at all. It's not adding up. So this isn't an uncommon occurrence. I'm not going to completely, hit on Russia for having such way inaccuracies, because the truth of the matter is that the United States Army, the United States Armed Forces, I should say, during the invasion of Iraq, according to Battlefield Command reports, we should have killed the Iraqi army in its entirety 7 times over. Like, the entire Iraqi army, killed them all, destroyed everything they owned 7 times over. We killed them all and destroyed them 7 times. We brought people to life and rebuilt tanks 7 times and destroyed them, according to Battlefield reports. So, this is a report that is analyzed, made by the Russian Defense Ministry as a representative Igor Konashenko, and he says to start, there are 25 villages and towns whose capture the Ministry of Defense has reported at least twice. Reportedly, they reported destroying 84 Bayraktar drones, which is about 20 more Bayraktars than what Ukraine actually has. A number of armored vehicles Russia has allegedly destroyed, 3,800, is significantly higher than the number of Ukraine had before the war, 2,416 according to Russian reports, and the number of Ukraine has received from the West, roughly 700, which isn't enough to account for the difference. Prokt's report also noted 2 phases that appear frequently in Russian reports: areas of accumulated Ukrainian manpower and equipment in Ukrainian strongholds. In the first 100 days of the war, Russia reported destroying 39,000 of these targets. And of course, we have that assessment here for you guys. Jump down here, and you hit up Belgorod, where a mysterious explosion occurred in Belgorod. The origin of this is not known. We don't know if this is Ukraine that has conducted a strike here. But we do know is that Belgorod is also known as the main point in which Russian ballistic missiles, theater ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles are launched towards Ukraine, specifically towards Kharkiv. In fact, In this second video, there's a translation here that is, and the morning begins, firing towards Kharkiv at least 7-8 every single time. So first, let's take care of this first video. This is of the current situation in Belgorod. Secondly, once again, and the morning begins, firing towards Kharkiv at least 7-8 every single time. And this is that video.
Началось в колхозе утро. И вот сейчас на Харьков. И так каждую ночь по 6-8 раз.
So once again, we know that Belgorod is the main staging point and launch point for these. We jump up over here into Belarus, where we have a couple of developments. Right here on the Polish-Belarusian border, we can see that Poland did complete its construction of a fence and border with Belarus. It has completed the construction of a 5-meter fence on the border of Belarus, in which is used to curb the flow of undocumented asylum seekers. The flow, this also is just a general security measure as well. But 353 million euros, or $407 million of steel wall, is 5.5 meters, or 18 feet high, and is 115 miles, or 186 kilometers long. 49,000 tons of steel were used to build the fence, and now the fence is being equipped with electronic security systems, including 2,500 surveillance cameras and motion sensors. We can take a look at that here. So, just a standard border fence, but a border fence nonetheless, that runs the entirety of the border. And if you want to read more about that, Al Jazeera does have an article on this. Up here in Belarus, during a summit, or during a meeting between the Belarusian dictator Lukashenko and also the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov, Lukashenko stated that Russia must be ready to use nuclear weapons in a conflict.
Склады боеприпасов ядерных в России, у нас их нет. И, как Путин правильно сказал, в 6 точках, в 6 странах находится их ядерные боеприпасы.
Долгие-долгие годы, и они летают, и пускают этих пилотов неядерных стран к управлению самолетами, которые предназначены для ядерного оружия.
Абсолютно.
Это нарушает договор о нераспространении по нашей оценке.
Но мы еще это не сделали. Но мы должны быть готовы. 41 год, когда мы думали, что, верили. Поэтому мы верим, но мы должны порой держать сухим по всем направлениям. И не надо там енчить, кричать, что тут Путин.
And this comes as there seems to be covert mobilization at this point inside of Belarus. This is something that was kind of expected, but the country is still continuing its military exercises, quote unquote, at the Ukrainian border. But men and women have received mobilization slips, with Lviv being on high alert. Ukrainian forces are already pre-positioning in the event of an attack by Belarus on its western border. We can see some of those slips here. So that's one of those mobilization slips. They are saying that this is just for training purposes in the event of, in the event they need to be called up for self-defense purposes. Of course, this is just for general training. We can see multiples of these slips being used. There's the one from the initial photo. We have another one here, another one down there. But they are being summoned, and they are being threatened with jail time for not answering that summons. Jump over here into the United Kingdom, where Amnesty International report condemns Russia on the Mariupol theater bombing. So this goes back to what I was talking about before, where the bombing of the theater in Mariupol is very blatantly a war crime by Russia. Very blatantly. And Amnesty International, a very reputable, human rights watch organization, has released its official report regarding this. And they said that Russia likely deliberately targeted the theater, knowing it had civilians were sheltered in there. And that fighter jets dropped 2 500-kilogram bombs, or 2 500s, killing at least a dozen civilians. They believe it's less than originally reported, but difficult to determine since Russian troops conducted a cleanup immediately after seizing the city. Amnesty International collected and analyzed a range of evidence related to the attack on the theater, including 53 first-hand testimonies from survivors and witnesses of the attack and its aftermath. And if you would like to read that report, they published them all on here. So you guys can go through this entire report. It's 72 pages long. I'm not going to go through everything here. But if you guys would like to read more, so all of this, we upload our maps now to our website. So you guys, every single night after I get up in the stream, I upload it to the website. You guys can go through and check out all of this stuff if you wish after the stream is over. And several developments coming out of Madrid as the NATO summit continues. The first thing is that during the NATO summit, more equipment for Ukraine was announced by the United States. Quote, "We plan to announce new advanced Western air defense systems for Ukraine, more artillery and ammunition, anti-battery radars, ammunition to HIMARS." This quote coming from the U.S. President Joe Biden. They're not the only ones. They're not the only ones here, as the Canadians have also stated that they will be giving 39 more armored support vehicles to Ukraine at the NATO summit, and this is coming from the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. But in other news regarding the NATO summit, there's also talk regarding China, and that is that the British Foreign Secretary Truss warned China against invading Taiwan. And he stated that China would have made a catastrophic miscalculation if it invaded Taiwan. And this was stated yesterday at the NATO summit. So, some very significant developments regarding that here in the NATO summit. But that brings us down here and into the Middle East, where we see that water is drying up pretty fast here. Bodies of water within the Diyala government is drying up extremely fast. Iraq is in a very severe drought, the likes of which have not been seen in decades, if ever. They are, as a result of the drought, they're losing massive amounts of farmland, and crops are dying because it's already within the growing season at this point. They should have already, been well on their way to getting ready to be harvested here in the next upcoming about month and a half. And this is all that remains of one of the riverbeds here. That's it. And you can see where the river was. And that's it. That's all that's left. That's pretty much being played all along this entire region. I mean, you're talking about the entire Tigris River is starting to look like that. And Tigris River, you have to remember, this is where Mesopotamia is. Baghdad is Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is the first real civilization in the world was founded in this region, between these two rivers, the Euphrates down here and the Tigris. So, very significant drought. Very significant drought. That's a huge river. Unfathomably huge river. It's, the Tigris and the Euphrates could be equated to, like, if you're from the United States, the Missouri River, the Potomac. I wouldn't quite say the Mississippi, but extremely large. The Ohio River, very large. Here in Yemen, there was an attack on a rather high-ranking officer that is part of the Saudi-backed Yemeni armed forces. A terrorist attack using a car filled with explosives was conducted in the city of Aden. 4 soldiers and 3 civilians were killed in the assassination attempt. The target, the commander of the troops in the province of Laj, he did manage to survive the attack. You can see that here. Obviously, that is the suicide bomber's car. So you jump over here into Kabul. The National Liberation Front did attack Kabul. They attacked the Taliban within the city for the first time. They tried to break into a building where the meeting of the Islamic ulema was being held during a Taliban movement. The Pashtun nationalists guarding the event exchanged fire with the attackers and neutralized 2 resistance fighters an hour later. Information about the victims of the attack is not yet known, but at the site of the clash, the Taliban found a large number of weapons and IEDs. We're going to take a detour and we're going to jump down here into Africa, where all of Africa at this point is in need of test kits and vaccines as monkeypox continues to spread. Africa has no vaccines for the monkeypox, and test kits are in extremely short supply. International health agencies said this on Thursday, warning that richer countries already appear to be hoarding vaccines. While there are no specific vaccines for monkeypox, but smallpox shots protect against the virus. These vaccines are in short supply globally, and there have been no donations to countries in Africa. The geographic spread of monkeypox is to parts of Africa where cases have never been detected before is a worrying sign, said Dr. Matshidiso Moete, the leader of the World Health Organization director for Africa. And if you want to read more about this, you guys can go and check out Reuters once again. They're the ones that we're getting this from. Down here in Argentina, in the city of Rosario, Argentinian truckers have officially ended their strike. The strike officially ended today after some unions upset with diesel shortages reached a deal to lift the 1 week protest in the major port of Rosario. It's expected to help the flow of grains for export going forward. Some protests, however, could continue since there are small trucker groups not involved within the deal. Once again, you guys can check out Reuters if you want to know more regarding the ongoing situation there. Is Argentina, as global sanctions are already racked or taking an even more larger toll on the already decimated logistical supply chain that's been so affected by COVID-19 over the last few years. Over here in the United States, contact lenses with augmented reality have popped up. Mojo Vision showed a contact lens with an augmented reality display. The display has a diameter of less than 0.5 millimeters, and the head position and eye movement sensors. The device already has a compass, display of images, and a teleprompter function that you can use without hands. The head of the company was the first to test the lenses themselves. Previous versions of the devices could not be used. But that's cool. I wish, like that's some crazy stuff. Let's go check out. This is their official website. You have to wonder. Let's see what they have to do. I guess not. So, but pretty cool. As you jump over here into China, Chinese scientists install a brain implant without opening the skull. This is pretty significant. Chinese researchers said that they were able to implant a sensor into an animal's brain without opening the skull, which could have potential implications for treating diseases such as Parkinson's disease and paralysis. Researchers at the Nankai University said that the sensor was inserted into a goat through a vein and received strong and clear electrical signals from the animal's brain. The biggest advantage of this method quote, the biggest advantage of this method is that no invasive open brain surgery is required to obtain electrical signals, and the entire operation can be performed in less than 2 hours, said the lead researcher Duan Feng. Pretty crazy. You can insert an implant into somebody's brain without cutting open your head. That's crazy. I mean, the medical advancements just keep coming on. I mean, we've seen artificial muscles on here. We've seen cool robots on here that have to deal with medicine that were basically just... They looked like crap, but it was kind of what they dealt with. We've seen, all sorts of stuff. We've seen, guys be able to eat again after 30 years of paralysis. We're seeing 3D printed ears with someone's own cell that successfully been transplanted. I mean, the technological developments for health are really, astonishing. What modern medicine can do at this point. So, while that is still obviously in a testing phase, they did it on a goat. They didn't do it on a person. That has pretty big implications because, if it's successful there, that means it can also be successful with people, and that's really the next step. So we'll have to see how it goes. But I mean, the ability to treat Parkinson's and paralysis. Sign me up. But that is actually all of the news in the world today. Quite a significant amount of news indeed. And so I hope that you guys have enjoyed thus far. I hope that you guys continue to enjoy, the way that we do things. I do understand that I do voice some personal opinions on here, but we try and stay apolitical and unbiased as possible, but there are some things that we have to have an open bias for. But I highly recommend that you guys do your own research, and I highly recommend that you guys read up, on certain things like the Geneva Convention, customary international humanitarian law, all of that stuff, so you guys can understand the gravity of what's really being said, and kind of when you're researching on your own and going through different news articles and what's happening, you can see why something is a war crime, why it's not a war crime, and it helps you identify misinformation too. And that's the trouble with this all, is there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation campaigns, and we don't want to. We try and sort through as best we can, but obviously we're not going to know the true facts until this war is over, and that's the unfortunate, harsh reality. But in the meantime, millions and millions of people are suffering, for whether that's because of climate change, obviously because of the war in Ukraine, because of ongoing conflicts, terrorism, drought, famine, pestilence, you name it. All of it is happening. And we want to be able to be the news that gives back. You guys have allowed us the opportunity to be the news that gives back. And please check out the different links in the description and check out all of those organizations all over the world. If you have any more, please let us know. We are constantly looking for more to be added. Just let a staff member know, either through the website or through our Discord, preferably, because you can message us directly onto there. So please go and check all those out. If you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, then give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us. The more people that come here, the more people obviously can enjoy the news, but it can help us make much more of a meaningful impact on people's lives globally. We're never doing super chats. We're never doing, we're never going to push merchandising or anything on here. Everything that we do is 100% to go and help people throughout the world. So I hope that you guys enjoy. I hope that you guys, to see you guys, on our Discord and get to chat with you guys and kind of go through some of that. We got a lot of stuff that gets posted on there too for all different regions throughout the world. And I hope to see you guys most importantly back tomorrow. So that way you guys can come and enjoy more news and see what's going on throughout the world and get an update on Ukraine and everything else. So once again, I want to thank you guys for your support. Please be sure to give your support and thanks to the staff. They're the ones that really do this. They're the ones that do the research and put this stuff together. I just lend the voice on this project, so make sure you give them a big hand. And hopefully, once again, we'll see you tomorrow. So in the meantime, I hope that you remain safe, that your family and your friends remain safe. Please enjoy a wonderful beginning of the month of July. And it's also going to be Friday tomorrow. So, and if you are in the United States, that means you're probably getting ready to roll into the 4th of July weekend. So I hope that you guys are getting ready to enjoy that weekend, and hopefully we'll go over some of that tomorrow night. But have a great night, guys, and do please stay safe. I really do hope so. I don't want any of my viewers going through any of the stuff that we have to report on here on the channel. So have a great night, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. My name is Paul from the New News, and we will see you tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. Have a great one.